I heard my mother's laugh before I saw her face. Her just a hanger-on, she told her wealthy friends, not even lowering her voice. I have no idea how she got in. Crystal glasses clinked. Designer gowns rustled past me. I stood frozen invisible exactly where she'd kept me my whole life. She had no idea I owned 60% of tonight's collection. No idea the $2 million painting she wanted already belonged to me. When I raised my paddle, everything changed. Have you ever been erased by someone who should have loved you most? The stories on this channel are created solely for entertainment, educational, and storytelling purposes. While some stories are inspired by real situations submitted by viewers via email, most details have been fictionalized, combined, or altered. My name is Megan Davis. I'm 36 years old, the founder of the Whitmore Foundation, and for the past decade, I've been building an art investment empire that no one in my family knows exists. Tonight, standing before my bedroom mirror, in a simple black Valentino dress, I looked like any other guest heading to a charity auction. But I wasn't just any guest. I was the invisible daughter about to become very, very visible. The auction catalog lay open on my table, turned to page 47, Light After the Storm, by William Davis, my father's final painting. The last thing he ever created before his heart gave out 10 years ago. Beside the catalog sat Eleanor's research file, thick with documents that had taken 6 months to compile. I touched the edge of the photograph showing the painting's ornate frame, and my father's voice echoed in my memory. The painting holds everything, Megan. Never let it go. I was 26 when he died. For the first 2 years afterward, I was barely functional. Grief swallowed me whole. I believed everything my mother told me because I had no strength left to question anything. The lawyer was confused, dear. Your father left everything to me to manage. It's what he wanted. I nodded and cried, and let her handle the estate while I tried to remember how to breathe. Year 3 changed everything. I was cleaning out my apartment, finally ready to throw away the boxes I'd been avoiding, when I found my father's notebooks tucked inside an old portfolio, page after page of art investment strategies, market analyses, collector insights, and on the first page in his careful handwriting, "For my Megan when she's ready." I wasn't ready, but I made myself ready. Years 4 through 10 became my quiet revolution. I took a job as a financial consultant, saved every penny I could, and studied my father's notebooks until I knew them by heart. I started small, buying undervalued pieces, building relationships with galleries and auction houses. The Whitmore Foundation was born in year 6, named after my grandmother's maiden name, so no one would connect it to me. No family money, no mother's assistance, just my own hands and my father's wisdom guiding me from beyond the grave. My phone buzzed. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. "The painting is confirmed as the final lot," she said without preamble. Eleanor Hayes had been my father's first gallery representative, and she'd become my closest ally. And I've been through Webb's archived files again. There's something he was protecting, Megan. Tell me. The sealed folder references a supplementary document filed 2 days before your father died. It's not in the probate records your mother submitted to the court. My hand tightened on the phone. She erased it. She erased something. Tonight we find out what. Eleanor paused. The original frame is intact. I confirmed it with the conservator. Whatever your father hid, it's still there. I arrived at Hartwell's through the side entrance and took a seat in the back row. The auction room glittered with New York's elite crystal champagne flutes catching the light, designer gowns swishing across marble floors. I spotted Eleanor near the front and we exchanged the briefest nod. Then I saw them. My mother swept in wearing crimson silk Victoria sparkling, beside her fiancé Harrison Monroe III. My stepfather Richard trailing behind, looking exhausted. My mother's eyes scanned the room with the practiced assessment of a woman who needed to know exactly where she ranked among the wealthy. When her gaze found me, her face tightened with displeasure. As the lights dimmed, I felt my father's voice echoing through the years. For 8 years, I thought his words about the painting meant memories, sentiment, a daughter's inheritance of love. But 6 months ago, Eleanor found something buried in a dead lawyer's files. A gap in the records, a document that should exist but doesn't, a truth my mother had spent 10 years hiding. Tonight, I wasn't just buying back a painting, I was buying back everything that was stolen from me. The first hour of the auction passed in a blur of paddles and prices. Paintings I had quietly acquired for the Whitmore Foundation over the years sold to eager collectors, each sale adding to the fortune my mother had no idea existed. I stayed in my seat, barely moving, watching the room the way a hunter watches the tree line. When the intermission was announced and the lights came up, I considered staying exactly where I was. But my legs had other ideas. I needed to move to shake off the tension building in my chest. I made my way toward the refreshment table along the far wall, keeping to the edges of the crowd invisible by habit. That was when I heard my mother's voice. A society woman in diamonds and silver silk had approached her, champagne in hand, and was gesturing in my direction. "Is that your daughter in the back? She has William's eyes." My feet stopped. My heart stopped. I was close enough to hear every word, but positioned behind a pillar where they could not see me watching. My mother's laugh cut through the ambient noise like breaking glass. "Oh, heavens, no, just someone who attached herself to the family after William died. A bit sad, really. She's never quite found her place in the world." Victoria leaned in with that sympathetic tilt of her head she had perfected over the years. "Poor thing still hasn't recovered from Daddy's death. She has these fantasies about being important to him. We try to be kind, but it's exhausting." The society woman glanced toward where I had been sitting, her face settling into an expression of pity. "How difficult for you both," she murmured, and the three of them moved on to discuss the upcoming lots. I stood there, my champagne untouched, my hands steady, even as something cracked open inside my chest. This was not the first time my mother had denied me. It was not even the 100th time. But hearing it spoken so casually, so practiced, I finally understood the full scope of what she had done. This was not random cruelty. This was a decade-long campaign, carefully constructed, consistently reinforced. Every time she told someone I was confused, unstable, desperate for attention, she was building a wall. A wall that would protect her if I ever questioned the inheritance. A wall that would make sure no one believed me, even if I told the truth. She had been preparing her defense for 10 years, and I had never seen it until now. I moved closer to the refreshment table, pretending to examine the selection of petit four. Victoria had drifted away from my mother and was now standing near the windows, speaking to Judith in a low voice. I positioned myself just close enough to hear, my back turned, my posture casual. "Mother, do you remember the night before Daddy's funeral?" Victoria was saying. "I came downstairs and you were burning papers in the fireplace. I asked what they were." My mother's response was sharp, defensive. "And I told you it was nothing. Old letters, sentimental things I couldn't bear to keep." Victoria shrugged, already losing interest in the topic. "I just thought of it because of the painting. Funny how things come back." She wandered off to find Harrison, leaving my mother standing alone. I watched from the corner of my eye as Judith lifted her champagne glass, and I saw something I had never seen before. Her hand was trembling, just slightly, just enough. She stood frozen for a moment, staring at nothing, and then she composed herself and glided back toward Richard with her society smile firmly in place. Victoria did not understand what she had just said, but I did. Burning papers. The night before the funeral, 2 days after my father had filed something with Attorney Webb, 2 days after he had hidden a key in the frame of his final painting, my mother had destroyed evidence. She had burned whatever my father had left for me, or at least she thought she had. She did not know about the copy. She did not know about the safety deposit box. She did not know that my father had anticipated her betrayal and planned for it. The lights flickered twice, signaling the end of intermission. The crowd began settling back into their seats, but I stayed near the back as my mother took the stage. As honorary chair of the City Arts Foundation, she had the privilege of delivering a brief speech before the auction resumed. She stood at the podium, in her crimson dress, diamonds catching the light every inch, the grieving widow who had dedicated her life to her late husband's legacy. "I want to thank our generous anonymous donor, the Whitmore Foundation, for their continued support," she said, her voice warm and gracious. 5 years of contributions totaling over $2.5 million. Because of them, my late husband's vision for accessible art lives on. The crowd applauded. My mother smiled and nodded with practiced humility. I watched from the shadows, and for the first time all evening, I almost laughed. She was thanking me. She was standing on a stage taking credit for an organization my father had co-founded 20 years ago, thanking the anonymous donor who happened to be the daughter she had just denied knowing. The irony was so perfect, it was almost painful. She had climbed to honorary chair by erasing my father's real heir, and now she was publicly grateful for my money without having any idea it was mine. I wondered what her face would look like when she finally learned the truth. The auction resumed and the lots continued to sell. I watched paintings come and go, checking my catalog, waiting. And then finally the image appeared on the screen, Light After the Storm, by William Davis. The MC's voice filled the room with reverence. William Davis's final work, his only large-scale canvas, a masterpiece that collectors have waited a decade to see. The painting glowed on the screen, all storm clouds and breaking light, and I felt my father's presence so strongly I almost turned to look for him. My mother leaned toward Richard, her voice carrying in the hushed room. This was William's last painting. I had to sell it after he died because the estate had complications. But I should buy it back now. It would mean so much to have it in our home. A tribute to his memory. Richard frowned. How much are you planning to spend? My mother waved her hand dismissively. Whatever it takes. This is about legacy, darling. I almost smiled. She did not want the painting for sentiment. She did not want it to honor my father. She wanted it because owning it would make her look devoted. She wanted to use his final work as a prop for her own image, the same way she had used everything else. She had no idea what was actually hidden inside that frame. She had no idea that buying it back was the last thing she should want to do. The auctioneer took his position. The room fell silent. We will begin the bidding for Light After the Storm at $400,000. My mother's paddle rose immediately, eager, almost hungry. For 10 years, I thought she had sold the painting because she did not care about my father or me. But watching her bid now, I finally understood. She had not sold it out of indifference. She had sold it to erase him, to erase me, to erase the evidence that he had ever loved me more than he loved her perfect image. My hand rose slowly, my paddle catching the light. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd, and when my mother looked to see who dared challenge her, the color drained from her face. Hello, Mother. Did you miss me? The recognition in my mother's eyes lasted only a second before she composed herself. She turned back to face the auctioneer, her spine straight, her chin lifted. If she thought I would shrink back into the shadows where she had kept me for a decade, she was about to learn how wrong she was. The auctioneer acknowledged my bid with a nod. $500,000 to the bidder in the back. My mother's paddle shot up before he finished speaking. $600,000. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear the edge beneath it. The room had begun to notice that something unusual was happening. Heads turned between us, sensing the tension that crackled across the space like electricity before a storm. I raised my paddle again. $750,000. Victoria leaned toward our mother, her whisper carrying in the quiet room. Mother, who is that? Why is she bidding against you? My mother did not answer. Her paddle rose again. $850,000. Richard put a hand on her arm, his face creased with concern. Judith, this is getting excessive. It's just a painting. She shook him off with barely contained fury. I am not losing William's painting to some stranger, but I was not a stranger. I was the daughter she had spent 10 years erasing, and tonight I was writing myself back into existence. I raised my paddle. $950,000. The crowd murmured. This was well beyond the reasonable value for my father's work, talented as he was. The auctioneer looked between us, his professional composure barely hiding his fascination with the drama unfolding before him. My mother stood up from her seat, her voice rising with desperation she could no longer hide. $1 million. Gasps rippled through the room. Richard stared at her like he was seeing someone he did not recognize. Victoria's face had gone pale. The auctioneer turned to me, and I could see the question in his eyes. Would I back down? Would I let this woman win? I stood slowly smoothing the front of my simple black dress, and when I spoke, my voice was perfectly clear. $1,200,000. Silence crashed over the room like a wave. The auctioneer waited a beat, then two. My mother's paddle trembled in her hand, but it did not rise. Going once, going twice. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed off the walls. Sold to the bidder in the back for $1,200,000. My mother gripped the arms of her chair so hard her knuckles went white. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply waited for what came next. The auctioneer gestured toward me, and I saw Eleanor moving toward the podium with a small card in her hand. She handed it to the MC, who glanced at it and then looked at me with new interest. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I present our winning bidder?" He paused for effect, and I felt the weight of every eye in the room. Ms. Megan Davis, founder of the Whitmore Foundation and the owner of the largest private collection in tonight's auction. The silence that followed was different from before. This was the silence of shock, of recalculation, of a room full of wealthy people, realizing they had entirely misjudged the situation. 60% of the evening's lots had belonged to my foundation. The paintings they had bid on, the art they had admired, the collection they had praised, it had all come from the woman my mother had called a sad hanger-on not 2 hours ago. Victoria's voice cut through the quiet high and disbelieving. "That's impossible. That's absolutely impossible." Richard turned to my mother, and his voice was flat, empty of the warmth I had occasionally heard him show her. "You told me she was a failure. You told me she had nothing. You told me she was mentally unstable and obsessed with her dead father." My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. For perhaps the first time in her life, Judith Davis had nothing to say. The MC offered me the microphone, and I took it. My hand was steady, my voice was calm. I had waited 10 years for this moment, and I was not going to waste it on anger. "I want to thank the City Arts Foundation for hosting tonight's event. My father, William Davis, co-founded this organization 20 years ago. It meant everything to him." I let that settle over the room, watching as people glanced at my mother, the honorary chair, who had never once mentioned that her late husband had helped create the very foundation she now led. I also want everyone to know that the Whitmore Foundation has been the primary anonymous donor for the past 5 years. $2.5 million, given in honor of my father's vision for accessible art. The murmuring grew louder. I turned to face my mother directly, and I saw the moment she understood. The color drained from her face. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "You thanked me on that stage tonight, Mother. You thanked the Whitmore Foundation for its generous support. You just didn't know it was me." The elite crowd turned to look at Judith, the woman who had publicly denied her own daughter, the woman who had claimed credit for an organization her husband built, the woman who had been living off her daughter's generosity while telling everyone that same daughter was worthless. I watched her social standing crumble in real time, and I felt nothing but a strange, hollow calm. I was not finished. My voice softened as I continued, and I let the emotion I had been holding back finally color my words. This painting was the last thing my father ever created. He made it for me. He called it Light After the Storm because he said that was who I was, his light after every difficult day. I paused, and the room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. 2 weeks after he died, my mother sold it. She never asked me. She never told me it was going. I came home one day, and it was simply gone. The last piece of my father I had left sold without a word. Richard stood up, his face twisted with something between anger and disbelief. "You sold your daughter's painting. You told me William left nothing of value. You said everything went to debts and expenses." My mother reached for him. "Richard, I can explain. There were circumstances you don't understand." But Richard was already walking toward the exit, his shoulders rigid, his decision made. Victoria scrambled after Harrison Monroe, clutching at his arm. "Harrison, wait. This has nothing to do with us." He removed her hand with cold precision. "I think we need some space, Victoria. Quite a lot of space, actually." She stood frozen as he walked away, her perfect future dissolving in front of her. My mother remained in her seat, surrounded by empty chairs in a room full of people she had spent 10 years trying to impress. None of them would look at her. None of them approached to offer comfort or support. She was utterly alone. I handed the microphone back to the MC and collected my painting carefully. Eleanor was waiting near the door to the private examination room, and I walked toward her without looking back. Behind me, I could hear my mother's sobs. The sound followed me across the auction floor, raw and desperate, but I did not turn around. I had spent 10 years crying alone while she told the world I was nobody. She could have this one night of tears. 3 truths had landed tonight. My identity as the founder of an empire she never knew existed. My foundation as the source of the money she had been thanking. And my father's stolen gift, the painting she had sold to erase his love for me. Eleanor closed the door behind us, and the sounds of the auction hall faded to nothing. We set the painting on the examination table and turned on the specialized lights. I ran my fingers along the original frame, searching for what my father had promised would be there. And then I found it. A tiny compartment carved into the wood on the back of the frame, so cleverly hidden, it would never be found unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside, a small brass key, and taped beside it a note in my father's handwriting. First National Bank, Box 2847, for my greatest masterpiece. My breath caught in my throat. I had won the auction, but the real discovery was just beginning. The next morning, Eleanor and I stood in the lobby of First National Bank, the small brass key clutched in my palm. A bank officer led us to the vault, a quiet room lined with metal boxes and located number 2847. It had not been accessed since my father opened it 11 years ago. The officer inserted the master key, I inserted mine, and the box slid free. Inside, I found a manila envelope thick with documents. My hands trembled as I opened it. The first page was a notarized copy of a will dated 2 days before my father died. I read it twice to make sure I understood. The will left 60% of his estate to me, including all artwork, his share of the family home, and his investment accounts. Attached to the will was a letter in his handwriting, and I had to blink back tears before I could read it. My darling girl, if you're reading this, your mother found the original. I knew she would try to take everything. She never understood that you were my greatest treasure. Attorney Webb has filed the original with the court, but in case something goes wrong, this copy is your insurance. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you in person. I wanted you to have a normal family for as long as possible. You were never invisible to me. You were always my light. Follow the storm home and you'll find everything waiting for you. All my love, Dad. Eleanor put a hand on my shoulder as I struggled to breathe. My father had known. He had seen my mother, clearly had understood what she was capable of, and he had tried to protect me even beyond his death. The heart attack had taken him before he could explain any of this in person, but he had left me a trail to follow. The painting, the key, the box. He had given me everything I needed to find the truth, and it had taken me 10 years to understand his final message. We took the documents back to Eleanor's office and spread them across her desk. She helped me piece together exactly what had happened. My father had filed the will with Attorney Webb 2 days before his death, updating his previous will to ensure I received what he wanted me to have. He had a heart attack before he could tell me about the changes. My mother must have found the original among his papers and destroyed it. She had threatened Webb with fabricated misconduct allegations, forcing his silence. He died 8 months later, taking what he knew to the grave. With no one to challenge her, my mother pushed through probate using an older, outdated will that left everything to her in trust. She sold the painting quickly, not because she needed the money, but because she wanted to erase every sign of the special bond my father and I had shared. For 10 years, she had been living on $4 million that legally belonged to me. Everything I had been told about being worthless, about not belonging, about being confused and unstable, it was all strategy. Keep me beaten down so I would never question, never investigate, never discover the truth she had buried. Eleanor asked the question I had been asking myself since I first read my father's letter. What will you do? You have clear evidence of inheritance fraud. You could sue, you could press criminal charges, she could go to prison for this. I sat with the question for a long moment. I thought about my mother standing alone in that auction room, abandoned by everyone she had tried to impress. I thought about the 10 years I had spent believing I was nothing, building myself from scratch, while she lived comfortably on money that should have been mine. I could destroy her completely. I could send her to prison, take back every dollar, make her suffer the way she had made me suffer. But I had built $30 million on my own. I did not need her stolen money. And I would not spend years in court giving her the chance to play the victim, to tell everyone that her ungrateful daughter had turned on her. That was what she would want. That was the story she would tell. I would not give her that satisfaction. Richard deserves to know, I said finally. He married her thinking she was respectable. He's been funding Victoria's failures for years without knowing his wife is a thief. He's an innocent party in all of this, and right now she's probably trying to figure out how to take him down with her. I sent Richard the evidence. Not to destroy my mother, but because he had the right to protect himself from a woman who had been deceiving him since the day they met. Richard's response was swift and devastating. His lawyers dug deeper and discovered that my mother had been funneling his money to Victoria for years, money he thought was going to investments and charitable causes. He filed for divorce immediately and turned all the evidence over to the Manhattan District Attorney. The DA, faced with clear documentation of will destruction and inheritance fraud exceeding $4 million, could not ignore it. The case moved forward whether I participated or not. 3 months later, my mother's attorney negotiated a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to fraud and grand larceny in the third degree. The sentence was 5 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and full restitution of $4.2 million. She avoided prison, but she had to stand in open court and publicly admit that she had stolen from her own daughter. Her social standing, already shattered by the auction, became permanent exile. No one in her former circle would speak to her. The invitations stopped. The phone calls stopped. She became invisible the same way she had tried to make me invisible for a decade. Victoria's engagement collapsed for a different reason. Harrison Monroe discovered that she had lied about having her own trust fund. Everything she claimed to own, the lifestyle she had presented it, was all funded by stolen money. He broke off the engagement immediately, citing fundamental dishonesty. For the first time in her 38 years, Victoria had to work for a living. She took a job in retail and called me within the first month begging for money. My answer was simple: you've spent 10 years benefiting from what was stolen from me. You can spend the next 10 learning to stand on your own. My mother appeared at my apartment the week after her plea deal was finalized. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the glamour and confidence that had always been her armor. "You've destroyed me," she said when I opened the door. I let her inside, but I did not offer her a seat. "No, you destroyed yourself 10 years ago when you burned Dad's will. I just stopped hiding from the truth." She tried the approach that had always worked on me before, the manipulation disguised as maternal concern. "I'm your mother. I made mistakes, but I was trying to protect the family." I cut her off before she could finish. "You were trying to protect yourself. You were trying to keep everything for you and Victoria. You spent 10 years making me believe I was worthless, so I would never look too closely at what you had done." I walked to the door and opened it. "I didn't turn you into the police. Richard did that. I didn't take your money. The court ordered restitution. All I did was find the truth Dad left for me and share it with someone you were actively deceiving. If that destroyed you, then you were built on a very fragile foundation." She left crying, and I closed the door behind her. I stood in the silence of my apartment and waited to feel something. Triumph, satisfaction, vindication. But all I felt was a strange, clean emptiness. The weight I had carried for 10 years was finally gone. That night, I sat alone with my father's painting. The hidden compartment in the frame was empty now, the key and note safely stored with my lawyers. But the painting itself seemed different, lighter, like it had been holding its breath for 10 years, waiting for me to find it. "Light after the storm," my father's last message to me. I had spent a decade believing I was invisible, worthless, a mistake my family wished they could erase. Now I knew the truth. I was so valuable that my mother had to commit crimes to keep me from knowing it. I was not the invisible daughter. I was the one she was afraid of all along. The question now was simple. What do I do with a masterpiece that taught me I was one? 18 months passed, and life settled into something I never expected: peace. The Whitmore Foundation continued to grow, and I expanded its mission to include scholarships specifically for young artists from difficult family backgrounds, children who were told they did not belong, children who were made to feel invisible by the people who should have loved them most. I called it the Unseen Children Program, and every application reminded me why I had survived those 10 dark years. I worked with purpose. I lived simply. I no longer needed recognition from anyone because I had something better. I knew my own worth, and no one could take that from me. The legal matters were concluded. My mother completed her community service and now made monthly restitution payments from whatever income she could manage. She lived in a small apartment and worked part-time at a nonprofit resale shop, the only organization willing to hire someone with her record. Victoria still worked retail, slowly learning that her value was not determined by who she married. Neither of them had contacted me in months. The silence between us was not cold, it was simply clear. Then the letter arrived. A handwritten envelope with my mother's return address. I stood in my kitchen holding it, my first instinct to throw it away, unopened, but something stopped me. I opened the envelope and unfolded the single page inside. Her handwriting was smaller than I remembered, less confident. "Megan, I've been in therapy for 8 months. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or money. I'm writing because my therapist says I need to be honest, and I've never been honest with you. I was jealous of you. Your father loved you in a way he never loved me. Pure unconditional, without expecting anything in return. I couldn't compete with that, so I tried to destroy it. I told myself I was protecting the family. I was protecting my ego. You were never invisible. You were so bright that I had to keep telling you to dim your light so I wouldn't feel small standing next to you. That was my failure, not yours. I don't expect you to respond. I just needed you to know. Your father was right about you. You are a masterpiece. I'm sorry it took losing everything for me to see it. Judith, I read the letter twice. I did not respond. I did not throw it away either. I placed it in a drawer beside my father's letter. Some doors do not need to be opened immediately, but they do not need to be locked forever. A week later, I visited the American Contemporary Art Museum. The Whitmore Foundation had recently funded a new wing, and the director had invited me to see the finished space. We walked through the galleries together, and when we reached the main hall, I stopped. I want to donate Light After the Storm, I said. The director stared at me. Ms. Davis, that painting is worth over $1 million. It's your father's final work. After everything you went through to recover it, why would you give it away? I smiled. That's exactly why I want to give it away. My father didn't make this painting so I could hide it in my apartment. He made it so I would know I was loved. For 10 years, it was locked away where no one could see it. Now I want it seen by every person who has ever felt invisible, every daughter who was told she didn't matter, every woman who was made to feel small by people who should have lifted her up. The director nodded slowly. We would be honored to display it. I had only two conditions. The painting would hang in the main public gallery with free admission, and the placard would read, Light After the Storm, William Davis, 2014, Final Work, donated by the Whitmore Foundation for Unseen Children. You were never invisible. You were always my light, a father to his daughter. The exhibition opened on a bright Saturday morning. The gallery was crowded with visitors, families, and students, and elderly couples and young women standing alone. I moved through the space dressed simply anonymous among the crowd. No one knew I was the donor. No one knew my connection to the painting that hung on the far wall, drawing people toward it like light draws moths from darkness. I found a spot near the back and watched as strangers paused before my father's work. Some took photographs. Some read the placard and wiped their eyes. Some simply stood in silence, letting the colors wash over them. An older woman stopped beside me, tears running down her cheeks. It's beautiful, she whispered. There's so much love in it. I nodded. Yes, there is. She read the placard again, then shook her head. That daughter, whoever she is, must be something special. Going through all of that, finding the truth after all those years, and then giving the painting away instead of keeping it. I turned to look at her. I think she realized the painting was never really hers to keep. Some lights are meant to be shared. The woman was quiet for a moment. I spent 40 years feeling invisible in my own family. My mother favored my brother. My husband never saw who I really was. I used to think something was wrong with me. I met her eyes. There was never anything wrong with you. Some people don't see clearly. That's their failure, not yours. She smiled through her tears. Thank you. I don't know why I'm telling a stranger this. I smiled back. Because sometimes a stranger is exactly who we need to hear us. She returned her gaze to the painting, and I slipped away through the gallery and out into the afternoon sun. I walked out of the museum and felt the light on my face. My phone buzzed. A message from Eleanor. The scholarship committee received 347 applications this year. Kids from everywhere. Kids who were told they didn't belong. I typed back, let's make sure every one of them knows they do. 10 years ago, I was the girl standing in the shadows, unseen by the people who should have loved me most. Today, I do not need anyone to see me. I finally see myself. My father called me his light after the storm. For years, I thought he was being kind, poetic, a father saying what fathers say. Now I understand. He was telling me the truth. The storm was never going to break me. The storm was always going to reveal me. And now that light does not belong just to me. It belongs to every daughter who was told she was too much or not enough. Every woman who was made to feel small by people who were afraid of her brightness. Every person who waited in the shadows wondering if they would ever matter. You matter. You always did. The only question is this: when will you stop waiting for someone else to see it? Today could be that day. Today could be your light after the storm. Thank you for staying with me through Megan's story until the very end. This is more than just a tale of revenge or family drama. It is a reminder that your worth is never determined by how others treat you. Megan spent 10 years believing she was invisible because the people who should have loved her chose to look away. But she was never invisible. She was simply surrounded by people who were afraid of her light. If you have ever felt unseen, dismissed, or made to feel small by your own family, please know this: their blindness is not your fault. Some people cannot see clearly, and that is their failure, not yours. You do not need anyone's permission to shine. You do not need their approval to know your own value. The moment you stop waiting for others to see you and start seeing yourself, everything changes. That is when your storm ends. That is when your light begins. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another video. We share stories like this every week, stories of strength, survival, and women who refuse to stay invisible. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever felt unseen by someone who should have loved you? Your story matters, your voice matters, and I would love to hear from you.